Good morning. Courtney Gills with CP24. I wanted to know a little bit more about the details for the CBSA officials scanning these shipping containers to ensure stolen vehicles aren't going out. I'm not sure who can speak to this, but what will that look like?
So thank you for the question, and perhaps I'll ask the Vice President of CBSA to add a few more details. We've heard from our colleagues with me here today and from people like Mayor Brown and others the importance of disrupting the movement of stolen vehicles if they're at intermodal rail lines and containers, for example, like the one here or others in the GTA. It's a lot more efficient and less expensive to retrieve those vehicles here than at a crowded port in another province in Montreal. To be able to do that, we need the most efficient and effective technology scanners. Some are mobile, some are more fixed. We have CBSA officials looking in New Zealand and other Five Eyes partner countries, acquiring additional technologies. We're in the process of redeploying scanners that are currently focused on some importation of goods to be able to work in the intermodal yard here in Brampton and other yards in the GTA to look at potential exports. We're going to be introducing changes to federal legislation to give the CBSA authorities to oblige rail carriers, trucking companies, for example, to accommodate their scanners for export of goods, and not only the current mandate for the importation. We gave $28 million, the Minister of Finance did, to the CBSA to acquire these additional technologies and to redeploy and train staff to do some. We understand the urgency of it, and the good news is there are more scanners and more staff quickly being put into position here in the GTA and other spots to disrupt this activity. But I don't know, do you want to add something, Aaron?
I think, Minister, you covered it much better than I probably will, but yeah, technology has always been a part of the arsenal that we use at the CBSA to interdict historically primarily the import of contraband goods, but we are now looking at how we can use that for the export of contraband goods, working with both CN Rail and the Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railway in terms of how we can deploy them here in Toronto area rail yards. But I'd also say we're not waiting until that technology is deployed. As I said, we've always used it as part of our arsenal, but it's not the only thing we've done. So for example, we've already deployed resources being intelligence driven to seize vehicles, over 1,200 vehicles so far this year, both in ports and also in the Toronto area rail yards. So in Toronto this year, about 440 so far, compared to about 680 at the Port of Montreal. So we're already generating success, and we expect to do more once we can deploy some of the technology.
Thank you. My next question is for the Justice Minister. You're also announcing more criminal offences and changes to the criminal code. What will those changes be? What will Canadians see right now?
So the changes that are being proposed for the Criminal Code of Canada relate to the maximum penalties for things such as usage of violence and the involvement of organized criminality, organized crime entities in the involvement of an offense, and taking the maximum penalties up to a maximum of 14 years. I think what's really, really important is that you heard Patrick Brown mentioning this. We're seeing what used to be sort of in the dead of night transgressions turning into daytime transgressions, live interdictions of a car, carjacking, etc., use of violence, use of weapons. That is very significant and very concerning. What we're also proposing is that when people are actively deploying children or people aged 12 to 17 in the commission of these kinds of offenses, that be treated as an aggravated factor on sentencing, which allows for a higher sentence. But the other key piece that I'll return to is that money laundering piece, which is that if you break down the money and the flow of that money, what you do is you make this less lucrative for those organized crime entities. That is really, really important in terms of getting at the heart of this issue. And the other thing I would say is that we need to really be working on this from a multi-jurisdictional perspective, because we know the statistics that Dominic LeBlanc has vary between 60 and 80% for an export market, but that means 20 to 40% of these cars are being sold right here in this province or in other parts of Canada through things like revinning, etc. That's why our collaboration with the province is critical, and our collaboration with the municipalities like Mayor Brown and his team of councillors that are here behind us is really, really critical, because local law enforcement has to be that first piece. So I'll return to that $121 million that Khera mentioned. That is a significant investment in terms of keeping people safe in their local neighborhoods. We're looking at this from every front. There's little pieces that we still weren't even able to mention today about amendments to the Radio Communications Act, about the actual devices that are used to make a car theft easier. So we're trying to apply this on every front. That's what we learned at that National Auto Summit, and here we are implementing those changes quite rapidly, including through those criminal code amendments. Missy.
National Auto Theft
Next
Summit.
question.
We've got all these MPs.
Dale
at
Manukduk,
a
CBC News.
crime
This is for Minister
theft
LeBlanc.
thing.
This is kind of a follow-up, but can you tell us what is the government doing to increase staffing for CBSA, specifically at these ports that are problematic?
And thank you. Your question is a good one because we've heard from our law enforcement partners across the country about the good work that the CBSA is doing, and the CBSA's mandate has traditionally been, obviously, as the Vice President said, to interdict incoming contraband. You can think of drugs, you can think of guns, you can think
that's
of
not what he asked.
some of the work that they do at airports and ports and postal
He didn't ask about their
stations
job.
across the country every day.
He asked how many are
but
you
we've had
adding
to
in?
shift the focus now to interdict, as my colleagues have said, the export of stolen vehicles.
Just a number.
So we've hired more CBSA officers. We've
How many?
deployed CBSA officers that had been working on other projects to these intermodal rail yards, to the Port of Montreal and other port facilities.
Just the
One
number.
of the things we've done is invest in the intelligence capacity. I've heard this from the Commissioner of the RCMP, but other law enforcement leaders, including the Chief in Peel Region, for example. One of the best things we can do is share intelligence about the organized criminal activities, which trucking companies are moving in what containers stolen vehicles. It's much more efficient for the CBSA to have this intelligence information from police partners, so you have joint task forces where the CBSA, local and provincial police are embedded together, sharing this information in real time, and then disrupting these containers as they arrive either at an intermodal rail terminal or a port. The more we can invest in intelligence, but just having additional border services officers. One of the things we're looking at, we focused on technologies and scanners, but one of the most efficient ways, again, based on this intelligence information, may be to have a CBSA officer actually open the back of a container. Open quickly, look in the container, and then close it, is one of the things that can be done in companionship with some of the scanners. But it's about deploying those resources, and that's exactly what we're doing, including hiring more officers.
Did he just say his new
And
brilliant
for
idea
whoever
was
is
to
best
open the
answer,
door and
what else
close
is the
it?
government looking at in terms of combating auto theft? We've heard a lot of measures today, but perhaps anything legislating vehicle manufacturers or the rebidding of stolen vehicles, some of those other issues we've heard of.
Well, so in terms of the legislative pieces that I mentioned, so there's criminal code amendments, there's amendments to financial instruments that deal with money laundering and tracking the money trail. There's an amendment that relates to the Radio Communications Act, which governs over the actual devices that are being used. But what's really critical is what we heard about at that National Auto Summit is that we had at that Auto Summit, the insurance sector there. We were talking about transport and investments in the Port Authority. As Dominic had just mentioned, investments in Interpol are really, really critical. And what we're seeing is that already those investments are starting to bear fruit. More needs to be done, clearly. That's why we're here today. But we've already seen literally in the hundreds interceptions that are being made at the port, and we're trying to move that process along earlier. But I'll return to that classic piece about sort of that cooperation that is needed. You know, we've heard, for example, suggestions at the provincial level about the consequences of a conviction on a first offense, a multiple offense, and how that relates to your civil ability to continue driving. We're looking for solutions on all fronts at every level to try and address this because it needs to be multifaceted. At the end of the day, Minister Anand was there also, and she's a representative of the Oakville region. She talked about affordability. And if there's one thing hopefully you've heard over the past 6-8 weeks about our budget, we are targeting certain things such as the cost of living. We know that affordability is part of that. Auto insurance is feeding into that affordability. If we can tackle this through our legislative measures, such as the ones I mentioned, we're confident that hopefully that has an impact on the level of thefts coming down, and that has an impact upon people's pocketbooks in terms of their insurance rates. Merci.
And I'm just going to say it might be good for us all to hear from the Commissioner of the RCMP who's here with us.
Yeah, Mike?
Thank you, Minister. Just to add to your question as to what more can be done, the RCMP federal policing is embedded to Mr. LeBlanc's comments earlier, where we have these joint teams, Project Vector here in Ontario, Project Recherché in the province of Quebec, in which the RCMP has individuals embedded into those teams. So that promotes the sharing of information, and there's just a better cohesion in the flow of information of what's going on in the auto theft. But I want to share with you on the international side, when we had the symposium in Ottawa, I shared that we were looking at connecting CPIC database, which is Canadian Police Information Center database, with Interpol's database, and we've done that late February. And we were able to download 141,000 entries. So now you're not just seeing law enforcement in North America querying stolen vehicles, you're actually seeing 52 countries around the world that are part of Interpol, actually there's more than that are actually querying it. And so far, we've had since May 16th, or I should say from February 13th to May 16th, we've had 1,553 alerts. That means that there's another law enforcement agency in the world that's queried some of the data that's actually in it. And then that brings up a second portion where there's 250 follow-ups that were made to request for that information. So it's a global effort here. It's not just nationally here, what we're seeing here in Ontario and Quebec, but you're seeing an international effort to combat it.
This guy does so much speeches. I wonder if he does any RCMP work anymore.
This is
I see him at
Nitin Chopra
committees.
from Prime Asia TV, and
He's everywhere.
Justice Minister and Public Safety Minister can answer that. Any announcement towards combating auto theft is a welcoming step by the government. And in last so many years, so much of damage has already been done. And who is accountable for that? And what is the damage? Canadians wanted to see the changes in the criminal code in the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to see the effective bail reforms,
Yep.
so that criminals were behind the bars.
Exactly.
We had seen recent Highway 401 crash where 1 3-year baby and grandparents, they died, and those suspects were out on the bail.
Yep. They
Same
were
things
out
we
on
are
bail.
seeing now also. Scanners, in the budget is mentioned that over the next 3 to 5 years we'll get the scanners. Why don't we get the scanners in last 3 to 4 years?
Yeah.
And
Good
loss
question.
to Canadian taxpayers is approximately $1 billion every year. If we calculate last 5 years, it's a $5 billion loss, 50,000 of insurance claims, and there's a taxpayer's money. And then we give 15 billion to other countries also. So 20 billion, we could not have improve our healthcare system where emergencies wait time is 5 to 6 hours.
Well, his question's going a little.
So thank you for those questions. There's a lot in there. Let me start with bail reform. So with respect to bail, we've been attentive to this issue, very attentive to this issue. And on bail, we worked very collaboratively with every single provincial government in this country, every single territorial government in this country, as well as law enforcement right around the country. That resulted in a bill called C-48, and we were able to secure passage of that bill this fall, and it's already been given royal assent and come into force. How does that connect to this issue? Things like serious violent repeat offenders now have a reverse onus on bail. So instead of being presumed that they're entitled to bail, it is presumed that they are not entitled to bail, and they have to convince a justice of the peace otherwise. That's significant reform. What I'd say to you here is that on that bail piece, that took about 1 year to get, maybe about 6 to 8 months to get to the point of tabling legislation, and 1 year to get it passed. Now you've got a February auto summit, and we're in May in 3 months' time, and we're already proposing further surgical amendments to the criminal code. That's very, very important in terms of increasing the maximum penalties. With respect to, I think you finished on healthcare reform, and I think all of these things are not mutually exclusive. And what I would say to you with respect to healthcare reform is that we've heard loudly and clearly from Canadians about healthcare and our health system needs. That's not just a Brampton issue, that's a national issue. But I would also say to you, it's about 15 months ago, we struck a almost $200 billion accord on healthcare with the various provinces and territories around this country, the lion's share of which comes to the most populous province, which is the province we're standing in right now. So we stand shoulder to shoulder with the healthcare needs of Canadians, and I'll allow Dominic to address some of the other points you made. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Arif. Just very quickly, we take the point on the urgency of the scanners. I'm not an expert, and if you want details on the different technologies, I'm sure the CBSA Vice President can provide that information. But we are actively procuring the scanners now, additional scanners. The Minister of Finance added significant investments before the Auto Summit in February, so before the budget. CBSA is doing that. I just said to the Mayor, to Mayor Brown when we met in Ottawa, we're hoping to redeploy existing scanners in the next few weeks. I don't want to pick a particular date in case you can't buy these things on Amazon and just tow them behind in a Ford F-150. I'm told that the larger scanners, you need the Nuclear Safety Commission to give you permission to move them down the 401. So this is a significant undertaking. The good news is we're very much on it, and I'm hoping to be back in this community in the coming weeks to identify examples of those scanners that will be in place very quickly, and more are on the way as quickly as we can possibly procure them.
I just want to say one more thing.
Wow.
I just want to say one more thing.
No, you don't need to
So,
say anything.
You see a lot of us here today, a lot of federal MPs and ministers, a lot of elected officials from Brampton, from Mississauga. You see some of our senior law enforcement leaders here. We're here on Victoria Day because we take this issue extremely seriously. We know the challenge is real and urgent. And the reality is, we have a plan with specific, tough measures. Many of them require actual legislation. They require changes to the laws we have on the books.
Because you guys messed up
forward
the
that
books.
legislation, and now it needs to be passed. And it can sometimes feel like parliamentary maneuvers that you see in Ottawa are just about political games.
Because
and
that's
they
what
don't
you do.
affect,
Nobody
an
asked you to
ordinary
talk.
person just living their regular life in their community, in a beautiful community like Brampton. But that's not true. We need these measures to be passed, and the games that we see being played at parliamentary committees and in the House of Commons, ongoing endless filibusters that
That's
mean
you
it
guys.
is taking far, far too long for urgent measures like this to be passed. That is hurting the lives of Canadians, and it is the Conservatives who are doing this. So I think everyone here agrees that auto theft is an urgent problem and challenge. I hope everyone in Canada would agree that it is. And, let's put the partisan games aside. Let's give our law enforcement and our border officials the tools, the legislative tools, the physical tools, the money that they need to do the job.
Follow-up is for Deputy PM. Canadians pay highest taxes, and this year alone, we have seen that payroll taxes up, alcohol tax up, carbon taxes there. Then we have the capital gain taxes coming, as mentioned in the budget. And then the scams are there, because another crisis is the housing crisis, which you are tackling, government is tackling. And then we have a mortgage fraud. Simple solution, why can't we link CRA with lenders, as in US, so we can tackle that mortgage fraud issue? Thank you.
Wait,
Yeah,
what?
thank you for the question, and there's a lot packed in there. And I do want to say, on housing and mortgages, we take the safety and the security of Canadians when it comes to their financial institutions and their banking system extremely seriously. And our government has taken historic, unprecedented steps to strengthen the tools we have when it comes to oversight of financial institutions, when it comes to measures to prevent bad actors, to prevent money laundering. The Minister of Justice spoke about some of those. But to your broader question about affordability, let me just say,
She just likes to hear herself talk.
our budget is a plan for fairness for every generation. It is a budget that makes historic investments in housing. No federal government has invested in housing as significantly as our government, and that includes major investments in infrastructure that are going to help municipalities like Brampton, are going to help provinces like Ontario to build the infrastructure that we need to get more homes built faster. The budget includes major investments in affordability. Things like a national school food program starting in September, so kids, an additional 400,000 kids across Canada are going to get some healthy food in school so they're not studying hungry. Major investments in dental care. Hundreds of thousands of Canadians are benefiting from this. We are making prescription contraceptives and diabetes medicine free. These are measures that will make life more affordable for all Canadians. And then finally, really significant investments in our economy. Huge investments in the auto sector, and we are seeing that really working with historic foreign direct investment in Canada. Canada per capita last year had the highest level of foreign direct investment in the G7, and that was before the major announcements we have seen already this year. And we're doing all of that in a fiscally responsible way that brings more fairness to our tax system and actually means middle-class Canadians, people working hard to join the middle class, are not going to have an unfair tax system. And what we are asking is for those who are benefiting the most, the people who are the most successful in our amazing country, and it's great that they're successful, asking them to contribute a little bit more so we can make these essential investments in everything from giving law enforcement the tools they need to fight auto theft, to helping Mayor Brown
She really
build
believes
the
herself.
community infrastructure he needs
really
to
does.
build more houses in Brampton. Thanks.
Just that loony.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. Very quickly, hi, Tony Grace with CTV National News. This might be for the Commissioner, but happy to hear from any minister on it as well. We've talked a lot about this being a GTA problem, large centers near ports and railroads. Can you characterize at all the prevalence that this has had on rural communities in Canada, the reach of these sophisticated organizations into our more rural communities?
So what the last report I read on the rural communities, what we're seeing in the western part of Canada, it's really crimes of opportunities. Vehicles are being stolen for a joyride or to commit an offense. But we also have to be mindful that the more pressure you put here and in the province of Quebec, it will eventually migrate to somewhere else, so we have to keep an eye on. That's why it's important working together.
Beth McDonnell, CTV News. This question's for someone with the government. What's being done to hold auto manufacturers accountable in this? We have so much technology today, and Canadians are scratching their heads. Why can't something be done?
Nobody knows.
So
Who's
your
gonna answer?
question is a very good one, and it was one of the subjects that we heard from auto manufacturers a lot about when we had our meeting in February. I know our colleague, the Minister of Transport, has had a number of discussions with vehicle manufacturers, including with his counterparts in the United States in an integrated North American automobile market. Obviously, ideally, the Government of Canada would do something in partnership with the Government of the United States. Our colleague, the Minister of Industry, is looking at, as Arif mentioned, the Telecommunications Act in terms of outlawing some of the devices and banning some of the devices that are used by people to copy some of the keys. But I know that the technology is changing. We need used by the organized criminal organizations. So the challenge is to have the manufacturers work with us, and we're prepared to use regulatory means as well. The Transport Minister has discussed that, and I know he'll have some details in the coming days of his conversations with the vehicle manufacturers. But I don't know if the Commissioner or anybody, the Commissioner was telling me on the way here from Ottawa that he had met recently with one of the automotive companies in Ottawa.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. I did meet with one company, and I can tell you that they're taking it very seriously. And it's not only this company, but working with other companies to try and find that. They're concerned. I've heard some people say it's great. They steal a car, they sell another one, it's good for them. That's not at all. They came in. There was a group of 5 of them, including the engineer, really working with us, trying to work with law enforcement and understanding, first of all, they understand the issues, the problems, but it's, again, it's not just one manufacturer that's looking at the issue, it's a collective effort, and it's not just as simple as I thought it was.
There's a feeling out there that the auto manufacturers do not really want to jump on this because they're essentially benefiting from the number of stolen vehicles that are leaving our country. So you're saying they're taking it seriously, but this has been growing and growing and growing. So how seriously are they taking it? What teeth do we have to enforce something, more substantial when people put down tens of thousands of dollars for a vehicle.
I'll share you my experience. They brought a couple devices that you can buy off of Amazon. That speaks to Minister Virani's point earlier with regards to regulation. The other thing is, if you look at a company whose car is regularly stolen, eventually no one's going to buy that car, so it's going to hurt the company. So they're mindful of what's going on, and they're doing a lot of work to try and address it.